We recently asked a couple hundred of you emerging biotech leaders about your go-to sources of information when you face tough professional challenges. Your top response wasn't webinars, it wasn't scientific journals, it wasn't trade shows, it wasn't even consultants. Far and away, you said you most often turn to your peers for trusted insight. Enabling a community of peers is what the Business of Biotech podcast is all about. It's also what our new Business of Biotech newsletter is all about. Peer-driven content, no strings attached, delivered to your inbox once a month. Go to bioprocessonline.com/BOB to subscribe. The Business of Biotech is produced by Bioprocess Online, part of the Life Science Connect community, with support from Cytiva. Cytiva also demonstrates its commitment to the leaders of new and emerging biopharma at cytiva.com/emerging biotech. Check that out. Dr. Adrienne Leussa has become the most visible and prolific advocate, if not the most visible and prolific face of African biotech. She's also a bit of a Renaissance woman. She earned her Ph.D. in biochemistry and worked in pharmacy and molecular technology before turning her attention to research and teaching, then drug discovery and development, and then business development, and now consulting and podcasting and board membership. I'm Matt Pillar. This is the Business of Biotech, and I'm honored that the tireless Dr. Adrienne Leussa is joining us for today's show. Adrienne, welcome.
Thank you so much, Matt. Thank you so much for the kind introduction. It's a pleasure to finally be on your show. I'm such a fan.
Oh, I appreciate that. I'm a fan of yours as well. Adrienne and I have been, we've been following each other on LinkedIn for quite some time now, and I'm so thrilled that we finally made some plans to get you on the show. And you're one of those.
It's an honor.
It's an honor to have you, and you're one of those folks who I sit back and I go, okay, where do I start with this one? Because you've done so much. Like you've done so much in the space, and you're doing so much for the space. And I want to get into that. I want to get into what you're doing for the space and what's going on over there in Africa. But I want to start with you. And I know, because you and I chatted a few weeks back, I know that your entrepreneurial sort of enterprising spirit took root when you were a young child, right?
Yes.
So I want you to share some of that story with our audience. I just picture little pre-doctor, little Adrienne running around the streets of what town did you grow up in?
Yaounde. That's
Yaounde.
That's the capital city of Cameroon. Somewhere in Central Africa.
Yes, and you were a young sales professional. We'll put it that way, right?
Yes.
Tell us about it.
I started pretty early. Around about 8 years old. I know that sounds scandalous.
Yes, it does. Yeah, you better keep talking, Adrienne.
It sounds scandalous, but it was first of all, I initiated it. So no parental what is it?
Persuasion,
labor.
Right?
Yeah, no, none of that. So I was young, growing up in Yaounde. And if anyone who knows Yaounde, it's very buzzing. It's where everyone else in Cameroon comes to, because things are pretty much, or at least back in the days, things were pretty much centralized in terms of government and policies and work. So it's a very cosmopolitan city. And I grew up in a little neighborhood. I was quite good at school, so I never really had holiday. So when holidays come, I was out of school. There was nothing else keeping me busy. My mom couldn't really afford extracurricular activities. So I really found myself a lot at home. And I saw other kids in my neighborhood would assist their parents out of need by going out to sell something. And for me, it was intriguing, first of all, because I didn't want to spend I had a working mom, so she would go out in the day. Most of my siblings, I'm the fourth of five. So most of my siblings were in boarding school. So I got pretty bored at home. And I suggested to my mom that I would like to go out and sell something like my friends. She was concerned, but I think my mom she's also very entrepreneurial. And for her, it was good that I initiated the conversation. So she encouraged it. We tried a whole lot of things. Every year will come up. So it was always during the long holidays at the end of the academic year. So every year we had like 3 months to do something. And we did a whole lot of things. And I did that from the age of 8 right through to when I was getting into university at 16.
Yeah.
So it was quite a good start to the entrepreneurial journey, to the mindset. Yeah.
What were you selling? Like,
I sold pretty much everything. So I started off with things like peanuts and a whole lot of other nuts. We're in the tropics and there's a lot of nuts. And people work at the time. There wasn't really like breaks at work, especially with the civil servants. So I used to take nuts to where the offices are. My mom was a civil servant with the public service. So she introduced me to her colleagues and I'll take stuff to them. On Saturdays, I'll go to like stadiums where there was football or handball, and I'll sell like ice lollies in a box. So it was fun for me. It was really fun just knowing that I could go out and make money.
Yeah.
And
Sure.
at some point I had the freedom to go out and buy my own goods. So at the end of the day, when I finished selling, I could go to the market and buy the raw stuff that I need in order to process and make the new goods. So that was quite an interesting upbringing. At the time, it didn't seem so glamorous, but when I look back now, I picked up a whole lot of skill sets that I wouldn't give that up for anything right now.
No,
Yeah.
I mean it's absolutely part of your foundation story. As I said, you've done a lot. We're going to get into a lot of the things that you've done along the way, and you've done a lot, and you continue to do a lot. And I think probably that foundation really contributes to your stick-to-itiveness and your fortitude and the work ethic.
Sure.
You said that you did that. You were working the streets, selling peanuts and lollipops up until 16 when you went to university. Is 16 like the standard age of entrance into university in Africa, or were you accelerated? Because here in the States, 16, you're still in 10th grade.
Yes, I was accelerated. Okay. My mom, she always, like even to today, she prides herself. She said I was an experiment. I don't know where that came from.
Wow.
So
wow.
At every stage of my education, she made sure that I skipped the last year. Oh. So from kindergarten, I never finished any cycle except high school, just because it was a science-based high school. And in the final year, there were practicals that you had to do to qualify to get into university. So that was the only cycle that I did till the end. I always had to study double at my final year because I was studying the year in which I was and the year ahead. So I think that also contributes to my personality and work ethic. That part, I did feel like I was being punished a little bit.
Well, I was gonna say, like I'm not sure if I'm proud of your mom for being a great mom, or if she should be, investigated.
Oh no, now she's so proud of herself. She's like, you see when I told you, when I was pushing you, you felt like it was too much, but now you can take leisure and actually look around because you have time. You don't feel like you rushing to somewhere. You feel like, okay, you still have a few years that you could navigate where you are at. And I think that's true. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You mentioned that before you went to university. So you went to university and you studied science. Ultimately, I think your undergrad, well, you got a master's in biochem, you got a PhD in biochem.
Yes.
But even before university, you were science oriented.
Yes.
Yeah? Why?
I've always, let's say, my culture, growing up, there were a few standard professions that the parents expected their kids to excel at, especially if you showed like you were smart at school, you got good grades. They kind of orientate you towards medicine or being, the other one was an engineer or a pilot. So there were these lawyer, I think there were like 4 or 5. I wasn't very good at math.
Oh, neither
I
was
wasn't.
I. No, I wasn't either.
So engineer and pilots, those were out through the window. I was good at science. I was good at biology, chemistry, physics. I loved. It wasn't my best, but I did like it. So I was always thinking, what can I do within those professions? But also, I noticed growing up, my mom, she was very sick when I was growing up. Nothing chronic. It was more bouts of malaria. Malaria is very endemic in the tropics in Cameroon, where I grew up. And for her, when it hit her, I would see my mom very strong, entrepreneurial, very like she has this really strong personality, being a single mom and everything. So she always had to have this stand-up personality. But when she got sick with malaria, she would crawl into bed and she'd be in bed for days. And for me, that really struck me. And I think somewhere I resolved that I was going to do something that helped. Initially, it had to be medicine because that was one of the big 5. But I recall when I did get my advanced levels, which is the certificate that we get after high school to get into university, I visited a doctor's office, and just at the back of his, where he was sitting, there was a picture of him dissecting something, and there were corpses. They were actually in a morgue. And I was like, what was that? Oh, yeah, that's in first year in med school. That's what we do. Sitting there, I made up my mind, medicine was not going to be for me.
No.
So I did a bit of research and I was like, okay, pharmacy, it sounds very close to medicine. It's drugs, it's meant for health, and it's also business. So it combines the business side that I like and the science. And that's how I decided, well, I wanted to do pharmacy. I couldn't get into pharmacy school because there were none in Cameroon at the time. And my mom thought I was too young. Yeah, to go abroad and study and study. So I ended up choosing something that was close to medicine.
Did you say, Mom, that's your own, it's your own fault that I'm too young at university to go study. You're the one that pushed me into this.
Exactly. So yeah, I ended up doing biochemistry, always with the hope that one day I'll switch into pharmacy. So I ended up doing everything. My focus in biochemistry has always been drug discovery, drug development, for that reason. Yeah.
Yeah. And so and we don't have time to go through like step by step your entire, the sort of the career journey. And you're young. Your career journey, there have been many steps along the way already, which is saying a lot because you're young. I mean, you've got a long career ahead of you.
Yes.
And I get the sense that having gotten to know you a little bit, I get the sense that the reason, or at least maybe perhaps part of the reason there have been so many steps along the way is that you have like an unbridled, uncontrollable, unbridled and uncontrollable interests.
Yes.
Can you control the steering wheel of Dr. Adrienne Leussa? Like, do you have any control at all?
I try.
You try. Yeah.
I try. I'm limited only by what I can physically do. But if I was left to myself,
which by the way, not to interrupt you, but you're limited only by what you can physically do. I imagine those limitations are few as well, because somewhere along the way you were also a Zumba instructor. So fitness is obviously important. I mean, the physical part can't be an issue for you.
Yes. So, I'm a big fitness fanatic because I got interested in pharmacy to help, resolve health issues, but quickly studying drugs, studying the development of drugs, studying, the side effects and what drugs actually do to the body, I quickly made up my mind that I'd rather not take drugs if I could avoid them. Yeah. So I'm very big on staying fit and healthy as much as I can I can. And then obviously getting older, I do know that your well-being is kind of like what helps you or enables you to do and get ahead, with everything else that you want to do. So I'm very adamant on having that foundation of health and well-being, and then everything else builds up from there.
Yeah. You're focused on drug discovery and development. You got to exercise those chops early on, I think, probably in your days as a lecturer and as a researcher, and eventually you took that to industry. Correct? Give me sort of the transition from academia to industry.
I started off wanting to be in academia and doing research. I mean, I'd gone all the way to Ph.D. And so for me, I wanted to stay on that path. However, I found out quickly that there was a limiting step, which is funding, and it doesn't come by very easily. So it felt very limiting. Mm-hmm. And I still also didn't find like I was fulfilling that business interest, the skill sets that I had gathered in my younger years by being a research scientist. So even while I was in academia, I was very unsettled. I always wanted to do things that engaged with people, things that put me out in front of people. So I finally made up my mind around about 2019 that I was going to leave academia, and I took up a job as a sales professional. So my entry into industry was not in the research space. It was more in sales. But I'm also very grateful because that was a great way to enter industry.
Yeah, when you applied for that job, you just had to bolster that 8-year-old to 16-year-old part of your resume, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I've been selling since you were in diapers.
No, quickly, I found out that is what I'm supposed to do. But that has changed slightly in the more recent years. We can get into that. But yeah, for me, working with people, being able to influence people and talk to people, it comes very naturally. And it's also, I think, a very useful skill set. Having had the technical background and expertise in science and in drug discovery, biotechnology, and then combining that with the outreach, the engaging people, the influencing people, the language skills also due to my various geographical displacements in Africa. I think, it all puts together. It's such a unique place for me in the industry. Yeah.
Right. Well, and communicator has become sort of a mantle that you've embraced, like, on top of scientist, on top of business development professional, communicator has been something you've embraced. And I want to get into that, but just give me a little bit more color on when you made that transition to industry and you went into business development. Was that with, was it 54 Gene, or was there a company prior to that you were doing biz dev?
Yes, for? there was a company prior to that that did sales, like a channel partner for a lot of global biotech companies and beyond. But I was in the biotech department, so catering to local or African customers for global biotech brands. And then that was where I got headhunted into 54 Gene, which was a newly a new startup in the biotech health tech space, to join them in their business development, building partnerships across Africa.
Yeah, and they were 54 Gene. That's a drug discovery platform, correct?
Yes. Yep. To be precise, they work in the precision medicine space. So they're trying to advance personalization of drug discovery for Africans as well.
Yeah. And you were there right up until January of this year?
Yes. And then things took another turn.
Yet another turn into sort of an amalgamation of, I'm going to assume here, and you tell me where I'm wrong.
Yeah.
What you're doing now is like you're like in addition to the podcast, which I want to talk about. I want to talk about your podcast here in a minute, but you're doing some independent consulting. You're consulting with some other consulting agencies. So consultancy is sort of an amalgamation of your science background, your sales background, and this communication sort of mantle that you've embraced. Yeah.
Correct.
So tell us about it. Like, just tell us what you're doing now.
Yes. It's still difficult for me to define it.
Yeah, me too. When my friends and family ask me what I do for a living, I'm like, you know what? I've got a great job. I love it. That's what's for dinner. You know, how about that?
I know.
Yeah.
I can say truly, I love what I'm doing. I love the fact that it gives me freedom. It's not something that I went out, with the mindset that I was going to do. When I ended my time at 54 Gene, I wanted another job. I wanted the security of a job. I wanted to work with another biotech company, Africa focus, business development. Those are some of the things that drive me. I have a passion for those things. And I also thought, okay, surely there are many that could, use the experience, the networks, the skill sets that I've built over the years. However, we are in a poly crisis, and Africa is not left behind. So it's very tough to get into the job market right now. However, the skill set is something that people told me we would be able to hire you for contract work, freelance work, if you were a consultant. So then I took the leap and I said, okay, I'll start a company. I'll put myself out there to, support businesses as much as I can in their business development. But most specifically, we all know that nowadays, the complexity of the world, the business world, the interconnectedness of everything, and people have to collaborate, people have to work together, even competitors. And that is not something that most companies, especially science companies, are still very, they work in silos. So we as scientists, I'm not sure how it is in the US, but we as scientists are kind of trained to be very niche, very focused on what we do. We do not easily share information or share resources. And I thought with the work I did at 54 Gene, the skill set I picked up as an alliance professional, having been trained professionally for that, could really benefit a lot of companies that are looking to grow, for ways to innovate, looking for ways to overcome certain hurdles in this business or macroeconomic environment that we currently in today. Mm-hmm. And so that's really where I focus. It's enabling collaboration, enabling partnerships. And even if it's not for partnerships per se, just having a really good working relationship with your key stakeholders, there's a lot that goes into that. There's someone that needs to focus on that. Most of the times we assume that, the machine will just oil itself, the relationships will build themselves, the communication will happen at some level, but there's actually tools and techniques and skills that are required to, reduce the failure rate for collaboration and partnerships to be successful. So that's kind of where I fit myself at this point. Yeah.
And it's, I can only imagine it's extremely fertile ground for you. I mean, so on one hand, I will acknowledge, having done it myself for 7 or 8 years, I was an independent consultant. And, mm-hmm. and when I made that decision to go do that, I mean, it was, my wife kind of scratched her head and said, "Are you sure about this?"
Yeah,
it was a little bit scary, but super rewarding, super rewarding. So congratulations to you for taking that leap.
Thank you.
On the flip side of that, I look at what's going on in Africa from mm-hmm. a biotech standpoint, and I think it's probably early. It's sort of nascent. I mean, obviously, people don't think of Africa as necessarily a bustling hub like San Francisco or mm-hmm. Boston of biotech, mm-hmm. but the the fertility of the ground for the biotech need in Africa has got to be immense, because beyond medicine, I mean, obviously there are very specific medicinal needs in Africa, but agriculture, right? I mean, your work now sort of bleeds beyond like biologic drug discovery, right? Medicine.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And there's the sky's got to be the limit.
I agree. Africa is such a fertile ground for biotech because the natural resources and they abound. So if you're talking natural resources in the environment, biodiversity, I don't think there's any place comparable to Africa. Unfortunately, we don't really know the depth of that, that rich biodiversity, because it hasn't really been studied in an in-depth and focused manner. Luckily, there are groups now, for example, the Africa Biogenome Project that just launched, I think last year or so, that are now focusing on that, on really uncovering and showing what is available in Africa's biodiversity. But you also talk about, or we can also talk about the genomics, which is a big deal. Because people of African descent are very diverse genetically, and that is proving to be a very rich resource for the biopharma space. So in as much as infrastructure and a few other things are not abundant yet in Africa, we have this natural resources. And also we have the population, the youth. Africa is now ranking among the highest, the percentage of the population that is young in Africa is really impressive. And this young population now has access to technology. They now have access to things that other generations didn't have, so they can innovate. They can really focus and create mind-blowing innovations, and that is happening. So there's this buzz of, okay, we have the resources, we now have the people, we have the drive. So let's get things done. So there's this let's get things done feeling in Africa, and that is very exciting.
You're so I want to try to get a lay of the land, because so you're in South Africa now, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. And like, to ignorant Americans anyway, like when we picture Africa, like we picture this giant continent, and we picture like that there's like civilization in South Africa, and then like the rest of the continent is just like desert, jungle, Now, I don't want to make it like a too in-depth geography lesson, but give us a lay of the land for like where biotech innovation is occurring. I mean, I can imagine that South Africa is probably the sort of the hub of it, but where else in Africa is there sort of innovation going on?
Yes, no, you absolutely right. South Africa at this point is leading in terms of biotech in Africa, because I think historically, there's been a lot of investment in education in South Africa. Really, the top universities, at least the top 5-10 universities, are based in South Africa. So a lot of the people in Africa do move to South Africa to get, educated, like myself. And so it turns out that and the government also has a few policies that enable people to stay and contribute to innovation in South Africa. So yes, South Africa leads in that space, but you also have Kenya, which is in East Africa. You have very good ecosystem that is building up there. You also have Rwanda. Rwanda is positioning itself to be the technology hub in Africa. You have really great government incentives that are attracting startups, attracting foreign investment in Rwanda. And you have Egypt. Egypt has long been, associated more with maybe the Middle East because of, cultural, sociocultural reasons. But there's also a lot of innovation in the biotech space, biopharma happening in Egypt. And then in Nigeria, for the population size, again, for the young people that are very entrepreneurial. And where else? I mean, in North Africa, you also have quite a few, Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco, that are also, doing great strides in biopharma space. So I think in every region of Africa, you do find at least a country or two that are really driving the momentum. And we do know that that will probably change in the next few years, because we have now the Africa Free Trade Agreement that is, in wanting to create a unified African market, putting down a whole lot of regulatory issues that would allow, free circulation of goods and people. And so, yeah, those hubs will probably expand in the next couple of years. Yeah.
When it comes to turning your innovations into clinical realities, the first step is transforming your process. On the Business of Biotech podcast, we bring emerging biotechs weekly insights to advance their pipelines, from funding to regulatory and other need-to-know topics. The pod is brought to you in collaboration with Cytiva, a global provider of technologies and services that advance and accelerate the development, manufacture, and delivery of therapeutics. Check out their resources at cytiva.com/emerging biotech. That's CYTIVA.com/emerging biotech. The free trade agreement and sort of international commingling or international integration with the African biotech scene is interesting to me, because you mentioned earlier, you were talking about the genetic diversity that's present in Africa, and that has got to be that's got to be a profound interest to researchers, specifically in drug development globally, right? Like the access to those populations has got to be extremely valuable, right?
It is.
So are
lots
you seeing
of clinical trial programs happening now on the continent. Lots of some of the companies have been in Africa multinational biopharma or pharmaceutical companies have been in Africa for quite some time, decades, but it's mostly been for distribution, for sales. But in the recent years, and especially, post COVID, the COVID pandemic, at the height of the COVID pandemic, where, things couldn't circulate, there was, a collapse of the supply chain, and it revealed Africa's dependency on the West for healthcare, for example. So now there's a lot of initiatives, a lot of attention to build capacity in Africa, because even it is of interest to these bigger multinational companies to have, for example, packaging plants in Africa. It will make it easier, and for now they can see the value. The market is growing. The young people are the standard of living is improving, so people can afford some of these previously unaffordable goods. So there is definitely motivation, and I do see that a lot of companies are taking advantage of this. I was reading, I think yesterday or today, a news headline. I think it's Merck that is just signed an agreement. No, I might be wrong. I might be quoting it wrong. But there was one of these big names that has just signed an agreement with the Kenyan government to set up an mRNA hub in Kenya. So yeah, those are some of the things that we're seeing on the continent.
Yeah, it's exciting. I mean, it's it's an exciting time. At the same time, like even some of the countries that you were rattling off there when you were talking about innovation and kind of where it's happening, like Rwanda, for instance. I mean, there's some historical sort of political instability in some of these areas. What are you seeing? And again, we probably can't go state by state, but what are you seeing in terms of sort of the, I guess, the levels of support that are coming from African governments for this kind of growth, and I guess what is Africa doing to sort of stabilize the opportunity for biotech growth?
Yeah, and I think you make a great point there, because obviously, if we're going to attract investment, if we're going to attract growth for the industry in Africa, there's got to be some guarantee of stability for those who are taking the risk to come and operate in Africa, or operate within the African ecosystem. We do see that governments are now supporting more and more African entrepreneurs, but even investors from beyond Africa to come and invest in Africa. In the biotech space, maybe less than in other verticals, but the attention is getting there. Especially again, like I would refer back again to COVID, that really revealed the need, revealed the gaps, and so we have organizations like the Africa CDC that is really rallying support, really rallying funding, really rallying capabilities, building skills across Africa. And so it's trying to distribute.
Adrienne, let me interrupt you real quick. When you say CDC, is that like analogous to the CDC here in the States?
Yes, okay. It is analogous, but it's the Africa organization, and it operates under the African Union. So there is this trend now, or maybe tendency for Africa to unite, to not deal with some of these challenges in isolated pockets and regions, but to rather look at how do we unite our forces, how do we unite our capabilities and tackle some of the big challenges like health or climate and things like that. So yes, there is that trend, and it's happening in terms of policy. It's happening in terms of even just enabling more stable governments and governance on the political front. That is also, we're also seeing some changes happening in previously problematic governments and countries. Some still need work, obviously, but Africa is not unique to that, as the recent years have shown. That
gosh, I was just sitting here thinking as you were talking, I'm like, yeah, I know about a political institution that needs some work. We're seeing it firsthand over here too.
So
stability's not been our strong suit.
Exactly. I think we can't keep stigmatizing that Africa is risky on the political front, because there's so much other things that are going on in Africa beyond some of the stories and the headlines. And when you look beyond the headlines, you do see good stories, good success stories that are happening right here in Africa. And that's also part of the reason why I started my podcast, to be able to showcase those beyond the normal headlines about Africa, what is also happening in Africa.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't going to bring that up till later, but since you brought it up, we'll go with it now. The podcast, Africa Biotech Conversation, correct? Or Conversations?
Yes, Conversations.
Yes. And so this is Adrienne's podcast. You can listen to that podcast like on Spotify,
all the major,
on Apple,
yes, all the major platforms. Yes.
Yeah. And so, I mean, you just mentioned one of the reasons why you started that was to create sort of an outlet or a platform to share success stories on the biotech scene in Africa. What I guess inspired you or gave you the confidence to say, I mean, as I said, I don't think it's an understatement or an overstatement, I should say, to say that you're a prolific and perhaps like you're fast becoming sort of the face, right, or advocate of biotech in Africa. What inspired you to say, you know what, I'm going to be the person who sticks that flag in the ground. I'm going to launch a podcast and also be a very frequent guest on other podcasts. Like, I mean, if you Google if you Google Adrienne Leussa, you're gonna like there's gonna be more video and podcast results than anything else, right?
Correct.
Why'd you take that mantle?
I mean, you for one, right? The business of biotech was one of those podcasts that I listened to, and I loved the conversations that you were having around biotech because it wasn't just the science. It wasn't just, talking about the scientific research, the breakthroughs, but it was actually understanding the business of running a biotech, a biopharma company. And for me, that was very interesting. It was a nice spin to it. I mean, I love the science, but if I'm going to get into industry, if I'm going to tackle business problems with biotech or trying to use biotech as a solution, in a business setting, I should know what business is about, right? I speak for myself. I didn't get that as part of my curriculum as a scientist. So I think your podcast, there's also the life science radio with Chris Conner. Those were some of the podcasts that I really enjoyed listening to. And I thought, why is there nothing like that about Africa? So maybe if I go back a few steps, when I was I had left academia and I was now starting my journey in industry as a sales professional, there was a lot of time on the road. There was a lot of time on the road driving between cities. And I love information. I've always been that curious person. I love to read. I couldn't get enough reading time. So I started listening to audiobooks. And then I stumbled on podcasts on Audible. And I thought, this is really fantastic. Like in 30 minutes to an hour, I can get a whole idea, fully developed. And these are actually living, breathing people most of the time who are telling you about what is actually happening. And you can follow on specific topics and things like that. So I got really inspired by folks like you doing podcasting in the biotech space. And it took me some time. Chris Conner will tell you, it took a long time before I actually said, okay, I'm going to be the one doing it. I hesitated. I was like, but somebody should be doing this. I remember asking to talk to Chris and just understand why he did it. And then I put it again on the back burner. And then at some point with my coach, we decided that I was going to launch a podcast on my daughter's birthday. We actually put that date to push me to actually pull the plug on it. And so that's what happened on the 27th of, actually it launched the next day on the 27th of September. In 2021, we launched the podcast, and it's been really great. Taken up, people have been curious about Africa and, beyond the politics, beyond the needs, the war and all of that. People want to know what else is happening in Africa. And there hasn't been in the past people talking about that, especially from a biotech business point of view. So I'm really glad that we took that journey, and it's still ongoing. And I'm glad that it was really the right time, because there's so much. I mean, there's been a slow growth curve in biotech, biopharma space in Africa, and just in the recent years. Again, I think thanks to COVID in a way, but there's been now a whole lot of invested interest in developing the biotech space in Africa. So in the next couple of years, we will really be hearing great stories coming out of Africa in this industry.
Well, I'm hoping that you'll be the one telling them. I'm hoping that you'll be the one telling those great stories on
I'm
Africa
doing
Biotech
my best.
Conversation. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. You talk about like getting started and taking on that mantle. And if anything, I think the Business of Biotech podcast has proven like when we started, like we didn't have a studio. We had like this was only a few years ago, but we had like pretty rudimentary audio equipment. You don't necessarily have to be good. You just have to get after it, right? And try to get better as you go. You know what I mean? It's like that in anything, any business. I think the biggest hurdle is going, getting over yourself, right? Getting over your self limitations, saying, no, I'm just gonna go do it. Maybe some people will like it. Maybe some people won't, and that's okay too. We're just gonna go do it. Yeah.
Absolutely. And maybe there was that. I mean, the whole passion for the industry, passion for information sharing, and engagement. But also I, for one, want to be more involved in the industry in Africa. So not just sharing the stories, but actually actively contributing to the growth of the industry. And for me, it's also a learning space where I get to talk to smart people who have done it before, learn about all the support that is available. And I think what is also really important about the choice of going into the podcast was getting into biotech. I had a very narrow perspective about the possible career paths that I could pursue. But I think talking about these, one of the other things I do want to share on the podcast is to give younger graduates, people aspiring for careers in the biotech space in Africa, to see what is available. And even if it doesn't exist yet, they could then take on the mandate to create it. So it's giving that awareness of, first of all, the value of biotech in solving, big challenges and problems in Africa, making it more accessible to people to say, yeah, it can be done. There's now lots of support and technology that can really fast track things in this industry, and anyone anywhere can get innovative, get an idea and pursue it. But it really matters to see other people like you that are doing it or doing something similar. I think it helps to overcome those self limitations that you spoke about. When you see someone within your context, your similar story, doing something that you think you would like to do. So I think that's also something that motivates me going with the podcast.
Yeah. I've got a few more questions. You got on time for a few more questions?
Yes, absolutely. Okay. Yes.
All right, good. Because I got a few more questions about the business scene in Africa, the biotech business scene. Just to give you an opportunity to share with perhaps a more global audience and folks here in the States around what's going on there. So I want to talk about some of the support infrastructure that's there for this budding scene, and for even for the individuals. Like, to your point, there are a lot of enterprising students coming out of school, and it'd be great to keep them there, right? It'd be great to keep them there doing the good work.
Yes.
So let's start with academia. Are there academic institutions that are particularly sort of at the front of supporting the biotech growth in Africa?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, because of where I am, and historically, it's also been shown that it's most of the academic institutions that are at the forefront of the biotech, biopharma scene are in South Africa. There's really great research hubs in universities in South Africa. I can maybe cite like University of Cape Town. They have strong divisions, departments in microbiology, biotechnology, drug discovery. You can Google maybe the H3D hub in UCity that is developing drugs. They're very strong in drug discovery and medicinal chemistry, and they've started even to they've started a foundation trying to build capacity and enable other institutions across Africa to follow suit and have the same sort of success that they've had in the recent years. But you also have Wits, University of Witwatersrand, very good university. You have Northwest University, which has one of the only really accredited centers for preclinical drug discovery and drug development in Africa. Really on par. They do a lot of work with both academics and even industry in that space. And just across board, I think there's quite a few. I think what I want to say is, or what I want to maybe highlight here is recent years, we've seen a lot of technology transfer, a lot of efforts put into technology transfer, where in the past, a lot of the research has really been just for academic purposes. But now there's a drive, there's really a push to translate these discoveries and research innovations from the universities to commercializing them. Yeah. I was recently speaking to one of the companies here in South Africa, where they started off by attending a TED talk by one of the professors at University of Cape Town, and they were able to out-license one of his innovations, and then they started and built their company based on that. So you have such stories, but it's not limited to South Africa. We're also seeing some of that coming out of Nigeria, some of that coming out of Kenya. I even recently was speaking to a group in Cameroon that are developing enzymes for PCR reagents. So you have these little pockets. Senegal, there's a lot of work happening also in the biopharma space. So academically, I'll say yes. And one other place I haven't mentioned is Mauritius, to keep an eye on in the biotech scene in Africa. Mauritius is also coming up as one of the hubs for startups, for pharmaceutical, as one of the pharmaceutical hubs in Africa. Yeah.
Yeah, that's I mean, I ask you a question and you just go on and on. Like the answer is so deep, right? It's so deep and rich. Yes. Like if I mean, even here in the States, you ask, well, where's all the activity? It's like, well, it's in Boston and San Francisco and Philadelphia. There's not a whole lot more to say, Of course, all these little cities would clamor for attention, right? Like we're seeing growth here and there, but no, that's terrific. I mean, it's just a testament to the fact that there is so much going on there. What about like industry organizations, sort of public-private partnership type organizations? Mm-hmm. I look at like here in the States, we have Bio and all of its affiliate bio organizations that are state specific. We have more academic institutions like Nimble. I mean, there's just a whole ecosystem of sort of organizations and institutions that support growth. Are there organizations like that there as well?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Top of mind now is Africa Bio, which is an NGO that works very closely with states, the governments in Africa, for advocacy and lobbying for Africa to, have a space in all the conversations around biotechnology. And they're supporting a lot of startups, organizing. For example, we have a big convention that happens annually in Durban here in South Africa called BioAfrica Convention. It's also affiliated to Bio, the bigger umbrella organization, but it happens every year also in South Africa. You have the Innovation Hub. We have a lot of hubs, mostly state parastatal organizations that enable startups to incubate at the very early stages, supporting them with lab space and initial grant funding to get to that minimum viable product stage and raise other rounds. So yeah, you do have other support systems. I'm also thinking there are a few investors, venture funds that are beginning to focus on biotech in Africa. I'm thinking here of, for example, One Bio, based also here in South Africa, that is raising funds, and they've got quite a good portfolio of companies that are going through them, trying to groom, the next startups, hopefully unicorns in the space. You have BioCity, which is also a parastatal or let's say a public-private enabled organization that offers lab space to biotech focused startups, and they also do a lot of skill building and capacity building, and they're looking to expand across Africa. So I mean, I'm probably biased by being in South Africa.
Wow.
But I do see similar, not probably at the same pace as South Africa, but it's also coming up in other countries across Africa, the ones I previously mentioned. Yeah, but you do get those same support systems happening. And I also want to maybe say that you also get international companies that, are looking now to Africa to support the ecosystem with either funding or skills that are creating these partnerships and collaborations to grow the ecosystems. Because at the end of the day, if Africa has a strong biotech ecosystem, everyone wins, because then we can better use the resources that are available for the good of everyone.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought up the investment community there, the investor community there as well. I've had conversations recently with biotech companies, biopharma companies in like Western Europe who, laud the innovation there, the access to rich academic work, and there's a lot of, especially in cell and gene, there's a lot of really good work happening there. But they're sort of less enthusiastic about the investor community there. They're still heavily reliant on U.S. investors. So it's nice to hear that there's some investment activity sort of budding there as well.
Yeah. But in emphasis on budding.
Yes,
there's a lot that could be done.
Well, that was my that's my next space. Question. Like, what would you how would you characterize sort of the most pressing need, or we don't say need, like need has a negative connotation. We'll say opportunity, right? Let's say opportunity. Like what's the most pressing opportunity that needs to be capitalized on to keep the momentum moving?
When I thought of this question, I actually recently had a conversation with someone who is very much more has much exposure. He's been working in other hubs in the UK, and he recently came back to South Africa. So he has this better panoramic view of what is needed. The one thing he told me was caution is we can't cookie cut and paste what is happening in other hubs for Africa, because there's a whole lot of other nuances that are unique to the African scene that cannot be replicated. I mean, we can't just replicate other models. We have to adapt them to the African scene. So I think there's a need for people who are more first of all, they understand biotech, they understand the science, and then they understand business, so that they can best, craft successful working business models for biotech in Africa, successful collaboration models for Africa. So I think there's a whole lot of that needs to still be done. But then another thing that he mentioned was a lot of the companies in biotech, biopharma are still, in the early stages, pre-seed, maybe seed at the most, but they now need space to grow. They now need space to, evolve and really take up, market share. But now the infrastructure is also something that needs more attention, because, they've gone through the stage where they could do with, co-locating in a university lab, or, just using a benchtop space at one of these incubation hubs. They now need to, get into maybe some initial manufacturing. So there is a lot that needs to be done in the manufacturing bioprocessing space. And the capacity, obviously, building skills for people that will work in those companies. I think those would be my take on what is immediately needed. And maybe also as a support to all of that is enabling regulatory environment. So there's a whole lot more that needs to be done at the government, the policies that facilitate, bio-entrepreneurship in Africa, that facilitate movement of data. That's a big deal in having people access the data, access samples, because even electronic medical records, it's not yet mainstream, and that will continue to be a bottleneck for a lot of things if most things are done manually and there's not circulation of information as it should be. So yeah, those would be some of the things I'll highlight as where the needs are.
Yeah. Well, there's you've got a terrific view of it, right? Like your word, we can take it at its value, because you've got those perks where you're paying attention to everything. You're obviously very well versed and educated on what's going on over there. And again, just an amazing advocate. Like your selfless advocacy for biotech in your home is it's honorable. It's outstanding. I don't know. I can't give you enough praise. I really like the work that you're doing.
Thank you, Matt.
Yeah. And
I'll give it back to you, because obviously the inspiration that you've provided by, pioneering, talking about biotech business, the business of biotech, it inspires people like me in, other corners of the world. So I'll give the credit back to you.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I appreciate that. We'll wrap things up here, because I'm getting close to abusing your time. But I always ask, like, what's next for you? Well, what's next for you? You just started some new stuff, but judging by your resume, there'll be some new stuff coming too. So what's on your sort of near-term agenda?
So like I've started with consulting. I'm getting into some really exciting projects that I would love to create success stories out of, for biotech companies and other neighboring industries. But I'm currently, or let's say the long-term goal for me is to be able to run a biotech company.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, this is news to me. We didn't talk about that. Wow. All right.
Yes. So overall, I would really love to have more, grow into that to have that capacity. So I'm doing a lot in building my own capabilities to be able to be of much more value in the African biotech scene. And because I do believe one thing I'm unapologetic about is my belief in Africa, my belief in the opportunities that are in Africa. I think it's just having people that have a vested interest and the skills to really harness that to the potential that it can be. And I'm trying to be one of those.
You're succeeding. You're not just trying, you're doing. And I appreciate it. It's been a fantastic conversation. And I'm definitely going to have you back. We're going to continue to pay attention to what's going on over there and the work that you're doing. And I'll have you back on before you're the CEO of a biopharma or a biotech company. And then again, when you are, and we'll just keep tracking. But in the meantime,
Absolutely.
in the meantime, I want the audience to know here that it's Adrienne Leussa,
Yes.
Leussa. So you look her up, you look up Africa Biotech Conversations, add it to your queue, add it to your, subscribe to that one, add it to your queue.
Thank you, Matt.
Listen to it. You know what? Before or after you listen to the Business of Biotech, I don't care. Add it to the queue.
Thank you so much, Matt. I really appreciate it. And I know your audience will learn a lot. It's always good to just be aware of what else is happening in the world. I love to do that. So I think, and I'm sure your audience is also the curious type that are always looking to know what is happening in Africa. And you never know, you may stumble on an opportunity that will change the trajectory of your business, your life. So tune in.
Fantastic opportunities over there. Well, thank you for joining us. I'll let you go.
Thank you so much, Matt. It was really lovely talking with you. Thank you for having me.
I enjoyed it. So that's Dr. Adrienne Leussa. I'm Matt Pillar. This is the Business of Biotech, and we are produced by Bioprocess Online with the support of Cytiva, which demonstrates its support to new and emerging biopharma companies at cytiva.com/emerging biotech. If you like listening to conversations with biopharma leaders like Adrienne, subscribe to the Business of Biotech podcast and sign up for our newsletter at bioprocessonline.com/BOB. Also, be sure to leave us a review. Let us know how we're doing. And as always, thank you for listening.